All right, Rabbi, say good morning, a good tavach, incredible schos, Baruch Hashem, to be able to begin the week together with all of you, steeped in Hamochras Hasina, beautiful sugyas ahead of us today. We begin by thanking all of the families who dedicated this morning's shir. We thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for dedicating all the shir and drashos over this month of Elul Haba Aleinu L'Tova, Baruch Meir and Rena Dubin, in honor of our children and all of the suburban sons and daughters beginning their year of study in Eretz Yisroel. May their Torah study and mitzvos in the Holy Land merit the release of our precious hostages, the success of our soldiers and the return to their families, and the arrival of Moshiach, tzidkeuni, bimheira, biyameinu. Amen. Our week of learning sponsors, Josh and Malkie Rosenbloom, and Shalom and Zahava Rosenbloom, Le'iloi nishmas Yisrael, Dovid ben Moshe Hershel, Zichrono Livracha, the brother of Rabbi Gedalia. We welcome Rabbi Gedalia back to shir. We hope that Eretz Hashem, the Neshama will have an aliyah, and the family in Nechama. Well, so with that, let us begin. Today's daf is Pei Beis 82. We're picking up on Pei Beis at the two dots, Higdilu lo yishpeh. So if we remember again, just to reorient ourselves a little bit, the Mishnah on Pei Aleph Amud Aleph, the Mishnah on 81a, was discussing the interesting halachos with the distinctions between buying 2 trees versus buying 3 trees. Simple distinction is that when you buy 2 trees, you do not get land. When you buy 3 trees, you do get land. So essentially, when you buy 2 trees, what you're buying are the rights to the trees, but ultimately, again, nothing underneath those trees. 3 trees, we'll see you get we'll discuss what you get along with 3 trees. So the Mishnah, actually, this part of the Gemara is commenting on the following statement. Let's go. So let's begin. Higdilu lo yishpeh. So heichi dami min hageza, ve'heichi dami min hashroshim. So one of the interesting distinctions that the Mishnah did was as follows. So imagine the following scenario. I buy 2 trees from Ruvain. It says buying 2 trees, that means I'm entitled to trees, not entitled to land. Not entitled to land. Just to understand, what are the ramifications of that? The ramifications of that on a very simple level is, if the trees die, then what do I have? What do I have? Nothing. In other words, I could have the wood from the trees, but Lamaisa, I have no right to replant anything else in that place. So the Mishnah then said something very interesting. The Mishnah said, Va'olam minagezeh shalo, anything that sprouts. So again, I bought 2 trees from Ruvain. So the Mishnah says, anything that sprouts from the trunk belongs to me, the purchaser of the trees. Anything that comes from the roots, and the Rashbam pointed out over here, what this means is from the roots means it grows underground, but it comes up. Ultimately, again, that belongs to Ruvain, the owner of the land. So if it sprouts from the trunk, it belongs to me, the purchaser of the trees. Comes from the roots, even though, again, the root system is attached to the tree, but if it comes from the roots, that belongs to Ruvain, the owner of the land. So the Mishnah says, what exactly is how do you define that which comes from the trunk versus that which comes from the tree? So we have an interesting machlokes over here. I'm Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says, simple, kol shara pnei chama zeh min hageza. Anything that sees sunlight, which essentially means anything that is above ground, is considered to be coming from the trunk. And therefore that belongs to me, the purchaser of the trees. V'she'ein pnei chama, but whatever doesn't see sunlight, zeu min hashroshin. Ultimately, again, this is considered to be coming from the roots, and therefore halacha l'maisa goes ahead and belongs to Ruvain. And the Rashbam says over here, it's actually right across the Rashbam. Kol shara pnei chama, hainu kala ilan chutz min hakarka. So if the shoots are growing from any part of the tree that is not earth, that is not ground, that's called min hageza. That's called from the trunk, and therefore that belongs to me. Any part that literally does not see the sun, which means it's growing underneath the ground, that belongs to Ruvain. Now I will say, just understand, the chiddush is, you'll say to yourself, of course, if it's growing underneath the ground, of course it belongs to Ruvain, because Ruvain still owns the ground. No, what's the chiddush? Where is it growing from? Where is it growing from? The roots of the tree that I own. But Rabbi Yochanan is making this interesting distinction, but since it grows underneath the ground, and I don't own the ground, Ruvain owns the ground, therefore whatever grows belongs to him. Okay, fine. So the Gemara raises an interesting point there. So I'll say, so now let's just play this out. So now we can put the case together. I buy 2 trees from Ruvain, so that means again, I don't get land, I just get trees. So now the Mishnah says, anything that grows off the trunk belongs to me. Anything that grows underneath the ground, even if it's from the root system of the tree, belongs to Ruvain. Beautiful. So imagine the following scenario. I have a tree. I have some shoots growing off the tree, but the shoots are growing right, in other words, right a little bit above ground level. Who does it belong to? Who does it belong to? Good. It's 50-50 chance you got on this one, right? Right? Me. But it belongs to me. It belongs to me. So the Gemara says, 1 second, are we concerned with the following idea? V'leichush, this is fascinating. V'leichush, delma maska ara sirton, v'amrele tlasa zivines live isli ara. Shouldn't we be concerned that what's going to happen over time? There's going to be, I don't know what the correct technical term is, but we'll use the term like soil erosion or soil like sediment shifting. So soil will shift around, and what could happen? The soil may go ahead and congregate. I don't know if soil congregates, but collect around the shoot, making the shoot look like a tree. And I'm going to claim from Reuven, Reuven, I bought 3 trees from you. 3 trees from you, right? Because now there are 2 trees that I originally bought. Plus, now the shoot over time that has been covered by soil and itself is beginning to grow, I could claim that I bought 3 trees, and as the purchaser of 3 trees, what am I entitled to? What am I entitled to? Land. Aren't we concerned that this is a potential situation where halacha l'maisa, I could use this? Now, here's what's interesting. The fact that the Gemara is concerned about this tells us that what? This happens. In other words, in general, halacha only concerns itself with things that are possible. So if the Gemara is worried about this, this means that soil erosion, sediment shifting, these are things that occur. So the Maisa aren't we concerned about that? To which the Gemara says, you're right. Ella Amar Rav Nachman Yakuts. So we'll say this is actually very interesting. Rav Nachman comes along and says, the halacha is shoots have to be cut. Shoots that grow on the trunk of the tree have to be cut. The only shaila is who gets to keep it. So now we understand. If it's a shoot that grows from underneath the ground, so that's going to belong to Reuven. But if it's a shoot that grows from the trunk of the tree, it belongs to me. It does belong because I own the tree. But what do I have to do with that shoot? I have to cut it down. I can't leave it because leaving it, again, opens up the possibility of somehow claiming sometime later on, if there's a shifting of the sediment, that maybe I bought 3 trees and therefore I'm entitled to land. Incredible. Supposed to take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. It's the last short line, first of the wide lines. Amrav Nachman Yakuts. Masnisin diktani hayotze min ageza shalo. When the Mishnah said that any shoots that come off the trunk belong to me, the purchaser of the trees, lo shiani chenukach. It doesn't mean I can leave it that way. V'yigdal ela hari hu shalo amnas liktzotz v'lisrof. In other words, it's mine, but I have an obligation to go ahead and cut it down. Now, lisrof literally means burn it. You don't have to burn it. You can do whatever you want with it. But l'maisi, you can't leave it on the tree. Incredible. Amrav Nachman, Naktina dekel ein lo geza. So, continuing on these halachos concerning the trunk. Rav Nachman says, we have learned that a dekel, a palm tree, does not have a trunk. Okay, so Gemara says, what does that mean? So obviously that can't be literal because a palm tree does have a trunk. So what's the pshat? So Savarav Zvilamemar ein lo geza lebal dekel. So this is very interesting. Rav Zavid said what that meant is like this: that although we said in the Mishnah, although again for the Mishnah it sounds like any shoots that grow from the trunk belong to me, the tree owner. Right now, you've also established that I can't leave them; I have to cut them down. So Rav Nachman says a palm tree doesn't have a trunk. Obviously, that can't be understood literally because a palm tree does have a trunk. So Rav Zavid said what it means is that the shoots that grow from the trunk of a palm tree don't belong to the person who purchased the trees. Okay, we're talking about, just to be clear, we're still talking about the case of purchasing 2 trees. So the Lomar ein gezel bal dekel. Ultimately, the owner of the tree does not own the shoots that come from the trunk. Now, what does that mean? Take a look at the Rashbam, 3 lines into the wide lines. Ein lo hayotzi min hagezel bal dekel. Dechevan delachpor ulasharish kai kishiyawa sha'ilan daha lo kana karka. So Rabbi say, now what's the logic? I'm sorry, let me finish in the Gemara. So Savaraz v'lemimar in lo gez lebal dakel, that the owner of the palm tree. So again, I bought 2 palm trees from Reuven. I'm the owner of the tree. Now something sprouts from the trunk. It doesn't belong to me. It belongs to Reuven. Why? Dechevan delamichpar ulasharish kai. Asuchi masach daite. So, if remember again, we had this in Friday's daf. Palm tree, although it bears fruit, right? Tzadik katamar yifrach. Although it bears fruit, what doesn't it do? It doesn't regenerate. In other words, the way palm trees work is they run their cycle, then they die. After they die, what do? You have to dig it up, you have to take it out, and you have to put a new palm tree in its place. Also, if you think about that for just a moment, It's very. You still remember the Gemara from Erev Shabbos, where the Gemara said, "Tzadik atamar yifrach ke'erez balvanon yiska." So why does the pasuk? Remember the Gemara said, why does the pasuk compare the tzaddik both to the date palm and to the cedar? Because the date palm bears fruit, and ultimately again the cedar regenerates, right? Because if had it just compared to the tzaddik, to the date palm, you would have said, although the tzaddik bears fruit, he creates new realities. Once he's cut down, once he dies, he can't regenerate. And I was saying, there's something powerful within the date palm as well. What's powerful about the date palm? That sometimes when you're cut down, or sometimes, again, so to speak, when you die, right? When you hit like a brick wall in life. So sometimes it's about regeneration, and sometimes it's also about uprooting everything and planting something new. Change requires different things of us at different times. So sometimes it's just a question of, okay, everything I got is here, I just have to regenerate, like the cedar. And other times, when you encounter failure, or setback, or misstep, or sins, it's not a din in regenerating what's there. It's a din of saying, what I have doesn't work. It doesn't work. So I need to take this out. This palm tree ran its course. I need to take this out, and I need to plant something new in its stead. It's reminiscent of what we spoke about yesterday morning, Shabbos morning, about this idea of ish acher yachnechenu. That sometimes in life, when the things that you started don't come to fruition, sometimes in order to make things happen, you have to become an ish acher. You have to become someone else. And it's this interesting, almost like this interesting dialectic in change. Sometimes change just requires me to take who I am and apply it better and apply it harder. And sometimes in order to be successful, I have to become someone else. Sometimes I have to uproot this palm tree. This palm tree is no longer good. It's not good anymore. This is not going to get me where I need to go. I need to uproot this. I need to plant a new palm tree. So I was thinking about this over Shabbos because even had the pasuk just compared the tzaddik to the palm tree, would have been a beautiful comparison. Because the tzaddik is someone who bears fruit, and the tzaddik is also someone who realizes that when my current persona is not going to get me where I need to go, I need to uproot this palm tree, I need to uproot this persona, I need to uproot this identity, and I need to find the koach to become someone else. I have to find the koach to become the ish acher. Anyway, so back to the Gemara. So Rav Zvid says like this. What's the thing about the palm tree? The palm tree ultimately again goes ahead and runs its course, then it dies, and then you uproot it. So the Gemara says, because of that, asuchi masach aidade. Because of that, the owner of the tree doesn't really have in mind for the shoots. Because since he recognizes that there is a limited life to this palm tree, he doesn't keep in mind if the shoots come from here, or the shoots come from the tree that they're mine. He doesn't have in mind for the shoots because he's hyper-focused on the yield, the date yield of the tree, recognizing that has a limited shelf life by itself, and therefore essentially he never has das to retain ownership over the shoots. And therefore, in a case like that, case of the palm tree, the shoots would actually go to Ruvain, who's the owner of the land. Take a look at the Rashman for just a moment. Asuchin masech adaydei, baladekel mina asilates mina geza. So, me, the owner of the tree, of the date palms, I don't really have in mind. I'm not really focused on what's going to come from the trunk of the tree. The savar hu shemeyave shadeka bimheira falo yotzi geza. Ultimately, again, because maybe the palm tree, and apparently palm trees, I guess, have different lives, have different durations. So I'm not even concerned about the shoots, because for me, I'm just thinking, I hope I get maximum life out of this palm tree to get the dates. So this is very interesting. So Rav Zavid wants to suggest that when shoots come from the trunk of the palm tree, the owner of the tree does not have in mind to acquire them. Because since the palm tree has such a limited life, his focus is on the date yield of the tree. He knows that the tree is going to die, and he knows he's going to have to uproot the tree. Well, he's not going to have to do anything because he only owns the tree, not the land. But the tree is going to die, and therefore he doesn't have in mind for any shoots that would come from the tree. That's Rav Zavid's idea. The Gemara says, one second, that contradicts the Mishnah. Maskif la Papa, v'ha konish nei lanos de lemichbar ulemesharish kaimi. V'katani the yesh lo geza. But one second, what about the Mishnah? What about the Mishnah? Right? So Papa says, but the Mishnah says that halacha l'maisa, Mishnah is talking about a case of two trees. And the Pashtos, we're assuming over here that the Mishnah is also talking about palm trees, right? The Mishnah doesn't make any distinction between what kind of trees it's talking about. And the Mishnah said if you own two trees, so you don't acquire land, but you do acquire all of the shoots, which would sound like this halacha applies even by palm trees. So what's going on over here? And the Rashbam says, "V'ha kona shnei lanos the masnisin bechol ilanos mayri v'afilu b'tekalim." B'pashtos, the Mishnah is referring to all trees, and the Mishnah says when it comes to all trees, you acquire the shoots. So what's going on over here? To which the Gemara says, "V'katani diyesh lageza el amar papa." No, ein lageza lebal dekel lefi she'ein motzi geza. Papa says no, something different about it. It's fascinating. The owner of the palm tree doesn't get the shoots. Why? Because there aren't shoots on a palm tree. The way a palm tree works, apparently, is rarely does the trunk itself sprout any shoots. But rather, if there are shoots, where do they come from? The top of the tree. So the Mishnah was talking about things that come from the trunk. Right? The date palm sprouts shoots, but it comes from the top, not from the trunk. Therefore, again, that's what it means when it says ein lo geza. Ein lo geza l'bal dekel lefi she'ein motzi geza. So take a look at the Rashbam again. The Rashbam says ela lefi she'ein derech dekel lahotzi geza klum ela milamala barosho kedelim kol anafav v'hilchach olan lo b'chevel kedamim amocher samayis u'mishum hachi hesech daitu afilu im mikri v'yotze min hageza hareyu shel bala karka u'masnisin bilanos. So this is very interesting. So therefore, technically speaking, palm trees, because it's just an interesting piece of information, palm trees don't sprout shoots from their trunk. They sprout, wherever they sprouted from the top. I will say it's true, but if you look at palm trees, right? Palm trees all look the same. A long trunk. And again, the leaves and the fruit are all on top. Again, palm trees have like these ridges, it's like layers, but there's nothing ever growing out. This is very different than regular trees, right? Regular trees often have protrusions or branches growing out. So therefore, so what happens if you happen to have a palm tree that grows, that sprouts something from the trunk? Because as the purchaser, I never had in mind as something that would occur, therefore I don't acquire it. And therefore it becomes the property of the owner of the land, i.e. Ruvain. Okay. Ula Rav Zavid, Kasha. But according to Rav Zavid, ultimately, again, this is a kasha. You're right, to which the Gemara says, Masnisin de Zaben lachamesh shnin. So Rav Zavid would have to say that the Mishnah is talking about. Now Rav Zavid holds that a palm tree does create branches or does create shoots. So Rav Zavid, it's a kasha, right? Because the Mishnah text says that all trees, the owner of the tree gets the shoots. So how does Rav Zavid reconcile this? So Rav Zavid will have to say they were talking about a case where the tree was sold for 5 years. Take a look at the Rashbam. What does that mean? Sha'af im yamos yita'achar bimkomo v'hilchach kevan de mishabda le'ar lezman kotzav v'lomasach taitim in ageza. So Rav Zavid will have to say like this. We could be talking about a case of a person, Ruvain. I bought the palm trees for Ruvain, and interestingly enough, I bought it for 5 years. Now, what's the chap of buying it for 5 years? When I buy a tree for 5 years, what that gives me is, in the event that the tree dies, what right do I have? I have a right to plant something new. Because since I own that area for 5 years, so in that kind of case, then everyone would agree that even the shoots that come from the palm trees are going to belong to me, the owner of the tree, because halacha l'maisa, I own this entire area for this duration of 5 years. Okay, so both say, so what's the takeaway from here? So first of all, the Mishnah's halacha, right? The Mishnah's halacha is if I'm buying 2 trees from Ruvain, although I'm not buying and I'm not getting any land with that, what I am getting are the shoots that come from the trunk, but not the shoots that come from the ground. So what's the chiluk between the two? We adopt Rabbi Yochanan's position. Any shoot that comes from the trunk means it's visible. It's visible. It's not on the ground. Any shoot that comes from the ground is literally underground, even though it's stemming from the root system of the tree that I own. Still, it doesn't belong to me because it's coming from the ground. It belongs to Ruvain. What do we do with palm trees? See, interestingly enough, what do we do with palm trees? So fascinatingly enough, apparently palm trees, halacha l'maisa, don't grow shoots from the trunk, rather they only grow shoots from the top. Therefore, it turns out that if I purchase 2 palm trees from Reuven and it does go ahead and create shoots, I don't own those shoots. Why? Because since I never had kavanah to acquire it. Why did I never have a kavanah to acquire it? Because it almost virtually never happened. That will belong to Reuven. Beautiful. Let's go back to so now we're transitioning. If I buy 3 trees, so I get land together with that. So the Gemara says vikama. So let's say, how much land do you get? So now let's talk about this. How much land do I get with these 3 trees? So I'm Rabbi Abba, I'm Rabbi Yochanan. Here we go. So now watch this. What area do I get? Now, say we're going to discuss this. This is going to come at the end, towards the end of Pei Beis and the Beis. Obviously, in order for this to work, the 3 trees have to be within proximity to each other. Okay, so we're going a little bit out of order over here. We'll get to what that proximity is. But right now what we're saying is, if I buy 3 trees from Reuven, so the Mishnah says, 3 trees you get land. So now the Gemara says, how much land? So essentially there are 3 pockets of land. Number 1, tachtehen, which means the land underneath the trees themselves. Beinehen, the space in between the 3 trees. Because remember again, the 3 trees themselves have to have proximity to each other. We'll discuss that. The space in between it. V'chutza lahen, and the area immediately outside of the trees as well. So I got the areas underneath the trees, the area in between the trees, and the area immediately outside each of the trees. How much of the area outside of the trees? V'chutza lahen amud beis 82b kimale ora v'salo. The amount of space, literally again, for a harvester and his basket. Look at the Rashbam for just a moment. First Rashbam on 82b, Pei Beis and Beis. So Kimale Ora Hamalake, so someone who's collecting the produce, collecting the fruit, the Salo Biado, and his basket is in his hand. Lilkot Peros Hanofos Hachitzonos, to go ahead and collect from the external branches. Because we'll say, so remember again, just to be clear, this external area is not an external area around the trunk. Right? Just if you understand the image over here, a tree has branches. The branches extend. The branches are fruit-bearing. So the idea over here is I have the area underneath the tree, the area in between the tree, and then there's an external area by the outlying branches where the harvester would go with his basket to pick the fruit off the branches. So that area, which again is a strip, it's not a lot of space, but it's space already on the external proximity of the branches of the tree. Okay, beautiful. Maskef Rabbi Lazar. So Rabbi Lazar says, one second. Rabbi saying this is great because little chazara. Maskef Rabbi Lazar. Hashta derech elo. Ora v'salo yeshlo. I don't understand. So Rabbi Lazar says, one second. When I buy trees, right? Even if I buy 3 trees, so it's fine. I get karka, and I understand that I get the area underneath the trees, and I also understand that I get the area between the trees. But you tell me now that I get an area outside of the trees as well, like by the external perimeter of the overhanging branches. When you buy 3 trees, even though you get all that land, you don't get a pathway, right? In other words, let's play this out. Right? I'm buying 3 trees from Reuven, and let's say again I'm buying 3 trees punked like in the middle of his field. So great, I get the land underneath the trees, in between the trees. But what don't I have? A way to access the trees. In other words, I have to buy a right of way. So we spoke about this sugya again. Right, I have to buy a right of way. This is mocher ba'ayin ra mocher. That's the Gemara's supposing for now. Right, mocher ba'ayin ra mocher. When someone sells property, they sell the minimum that they're obligated to sell. So now it's great. I bought 3 trees. I get the karka underneath the trees. I get the karka in between the trees. Now you want to tell me that I get karka by the external perimeter of the overhanging branches. Really? I have to buy back a right of way. So if I have to buy back a right of way, why would I get the external perimeter around the overhanging branches? That's all the Gemara says. So derech ein lo ora v'salo yeshlo derech ein lo da'arach risihi. I don't even have a right of way, right? Because remember again, the field belongs to someone else. Ora v'salo yeshlo. Does it make sense to say that I automatically get a pathway around the external overhanging branches? Amr Zera. So we'll say, I just want to point out something very interesting. Rabbi Lazar's entire question is predicated on the fact that we hold like the Chachamim, that mocher ba'ayin ra'a mocher. Remember, this whole question hinges on that when you sell property, remember again, Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim. Rabbi Akiva holds mocher ba'ayin yafa mocher. When you sell with generosity, which is that the seller always wants to give maximum benefit to the buyer. Chachamim mocher ba'ayin ra'a mocher. No, you sell the minimum that you're obligated to sell, and not anymore. So Rabbi Lazar understands that when I buy 3 trees, I'm going to get the karka underneath the trees and the karka in between the trees. That I absolutely understand. But this idea that I'm getting a ring of land on the external part of the trees in order to collect the fruits from the overhanging branches, so that seems to be a lot. Especially given the fact, if you subscribe to the view of mocher ba'ayin ra, why would you get that external ring? Because also, remember again, the area underneath the trees could also mean the area upon which the trees are situated, as well as what? The area underneath the branches, right? So if you want to go ahead and collect the fruit from the external branches, what should you do? Have to stand underneath the branch cover, right? Stick your hand out and pull them like that. Who's to say you get, in other words, the way that the Gemara is framing it is, next cycle we're going to do PowerPoints, right? But if you can imagine, this is going to be very helpful. If this is a tree, I know, very descriptive, right? If this is your tree, right? So the branch ends here, the overhanging branch ends here. So now, what the Gemara is saying is, I get land out here, like a strip of land out here. So, as opposed to, let's say, saying, no, stand underneath the branch canopy, just reach in. No, I get land actually over here. So Rabbi Lazar is just saying, that's so strange, because I don't even have a way of accessing my 3 trees without buying back a right of way. And now I'm getting extra land out here. That doesn't seem to make sense. So the Gemara says, Amar B'Zeira. Rabbi Zera says, Midiv Rabbeinu, Bosa 82b, 4 lines down from the top. Amar B'Zeira, Midiv Rabbeinu Nilman. From the words of Rabbi Lazar, we could see, Shloshu de'im lo derech. Now this is actually very interesting. It's only when you buy 3 trees that you don't get a right of way, right? Because again, since with 3 trees, I'm buying a field, and ultimately again, mocher ba'ayin ra'a mocher, I have to buy back a right of way. Listen to this. Shnayim yeshlo. This is fascinating. If I buy 2 trees, then I do get a right of way. Now, what's the pshat with that? This is actually fascinating. The Amalei ba'ara didach kaini. We'll say, here's the big difference. When I buy 2 trees, whose land are my trees situated on? Whose land? Ruvain, the sellers. So, because of that, already I'm utilizing Ruvain's land. Like, that's the whole thing. In other words, this whole usage of my trees is on Ruvain's land, right? That's why, again, anything that goes from underneath the ground, even though it's coming from my tree's root system, belongs to Ruvain. So once I'm already utilizing Ruvain's land, I'm being hosted, so to speak, on Ruvain's land, it makes sense that I get a right of way automatically included. When I buy 3 trees, what am I getting? Land. So now I essentially have my little own island of ownership over here. It might be embedded in the middle of Ruvain's field, but that's my land as well. So because that's my property, Ruvain's not hosting my trees on his property. My trees are being hosted on my property. So because of that, right of way is not included. A very interesting distinction here. So we'll say, so now again, so therefore Rabbi Lazar is still challenging. Remember, we said before, who did we quote? Rav Abba said, Rabbi Yochanan said, when you buy 3 trees, you get 3 things. Area underneath the trees, area in between the trees, and the area outside of the overhanging branches. Rabbi Lazar is okay with the area beneath the trees, area in between the trees. What he's not okay is with the external area. So the Gemara says, Lema, Rabbi Lazar leslay the Shmuel Rabbein. Rabbi Lazar doesn't hold like his Rebbe Shmuel. Da'amar Shmuel says, Halacha k'Rabbi Akiva, Da'amar mocher ba'ayin yafa mocher. So as I mentioned to you before, Rabbi Lazar's entire approach is based on the premise of mocher ba'ayin ra'a mocher. Interestingly enough, comes along Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak and says to Rava, wow, I guess Rabbi Lazar doesn't hold like his Rebbe. Rabbi Lazar's Rebbe was Shmuel. Shmuel paskin like Rabbi Akiva, that mocher ba'ayin yafa mocher, that a seller sells with incredible generosity. And if that's the case, then Lamaisa what? Then Lamaisa, Rabbi Lazar should not have any problem with the external piece of land around the overhanging branches. No, it's just our Mishnah doesn't work according to Rabbi Akiva. Why not? Mediktani higdilu yishbeh. So this is very interesting. Remember again, the Mishnah, just to give you the context, the Mishnah was speaking about the following case. The Mishnah said that halacha l'maisa, if I go ahead and I purchased 3 trees from Reuben. We're going to talk about this more tomorrow. I purchased 3 trees, a little bit today also. I purchased 3 trees from Reuben. So once again, 3 trees becomes what? What does 3 trees become? A field, right? That becomes a field that I'm purchasing. What happens if my trees, bless you, my trees go ahead and grow, right? The branches overgrow onto Reuben's property. What's the halacha? Reuben's permitted to cut back the branches. So the Gemara wants to suggest like this. Our Mishnah must not be reflective of the view of Rabbi Akiva. Why? Because the Mishnah says, if my branches overgrow onto Reuven's field, he could cut them back. V'savet Rabbi Akiva but if it was Rabbi Akiva, right? Why would Reuven be allowed to cut the branches? After all, ha'amar mocher ba'ayin yafeh mocher. A seller always sells with incredible generosity. So Rabbi said this is quite fascinating. The Gemara assumes over here like this. Reuven knows when he sells me 3 trees, so I get the trees and the surrounding area. It's known that branches overgrow. So therefore, again, we would think that according to Rabbi Akiva, mocher ba'ayin yafeh mocher, and therefore, again, Reuven knows that the branches are going to overgrow, and therefore, halacha l'maisa, he should allow that. He should allow that. That's part of the generosity of the sale. Yeah, what does the Mishnah say? The Mishnah says that he could cut back the branches. So obviously the Mishnah doesn't reflect the view of Rabbi Akiva. No. We'll say, to be clear, the Gemara says now, even Rabbi Akiva, who says mocher ba'ayin yafa mocher, that has its limits. In other words, as a seller, I'm willing to sell with incredible generosity. Right? As a seller, I want to do good by the buyer. But I want to do good to the buyer, but not put myself at a disadvantage. So watch this. Amrulei, Eimar den Rabbi Akiva, Gabi bar vidus delmachashiara. So let's say, for example, Rabbi Akiva says that, let's say, mocher ba'ayin yafa, let's say in the case of the pit or the water cistern, where l'maisa, again, my generosity as the seller doesn't have a negative impact on my property. Gabe ilad mishamislay. Shabbos say, here's the problem. If haloch l'maisa, Reuven sells me the 3 trees. So now again, I acquire the trees and the land. If my trees begin to overgrow onto Reuven's property, that could put Reuven at a disadvantage. For example, let's say Reuven's growing crops right next to my field. And now what happens? As a result of the branches that are overgrowing, his crops are being shaded and not getting proper sunlight. That puts Reuven at a disadvantage. Shabbos said, this is incredible. When do we say mocher ba'ayin yafeh mocher? Only ultimately, again, when it doesn't put the mocher at a disadvantage. But if it comes to me at a disadvantage, even Rabbi Akiva would say, that's never my kavanah. So therefore, again, in the Mishnah, when we say that if Reuven sold me 3 trees, that I acquired the trees and the karka, and yet it says that if my branch is overgrown to Reuven's field, he has the right to cut them down, that's still according to Rabbi Akiva. It's also like a very interesting din in human nature. People are good, and people are givers. But one should not expect people to do things that put themselves at a disadvantage. And in other words, people will do good, and people always. Sometimes, like, we become frustrated. We expect someone to do something, and they don't do it. I can always say, human nature is, I'm willing to give, willing to do, as long as I'm not put at a disadvantage. Again, obviously, that's where tremendous chesed comes in, and that's what it means to be a Baal Chesed. Being a Baal Chesed means doing good for the other, even when it is inconvenient. That's the godless, right? The godless of Chesed is not that I do nice things. People are good and they want to do nice things. The godless of Chesed is doing good things that may be profoundly inconvenient, but yet I still do it anyway. So human nature demands, according to Rabbi Akiva, the mocher ba'ayin yafeh, do good things. But a person only expected to do good things so long as those good things do not put them at a disadvantage, right? Or inconvenience them. Chesed comes along and says, even if it's a little inconvenient or a little disadvantageous, still try to do it. Incredible. Simon goes like, Mila Model Yakiva. After all, doesn't Rabbi Akiva agree? So what we're going to see this case. We're going to see this case. Actually, we saw this case. We'll see it again. Rabbi Akiva agrees that halacha l'maisa, right? If I have a neighbor. My neighbor has a tree. The tree is overgrowing into my field. Rabbi Akiva holds that I'm allowed to cut back that tree to the height so that I can go underneath it with my ox and my plow. So you see Rabbi Akiva, who's very generous. Again, generosity has its limits. Mocher ba'ayin yafa is good so long as it does not put the seller at a disadvantage. But the moment that a seller is at a disadvantage, even Rabbi Akiva holds that the seller is permitted to take remedial action in order to go ahead and prevent any kind of loss. Tanya Kabal say, so therefore, again, just understand what's happening over here. So really, what we're back over here is as follows. Remember, what is our sugya? This current sugya is trying to figure out. The Mishnah told me that when I buy 3 trees, I get land. We're trying to figure out how much land do you get. Rabbi Chia is of the Rabbi Yochanan, three pockets of land: the area underneath the trees, the area in between the trees, and also a small ring of land on the external perimeter of the trees, large enough for a person with a basket to go and to collect the produce. Rabbi Lazar wanted to come along and say that's a problem. We kind of dealt with that. Says the Gemara. Tanya Kavas there's a brayso that supports Rabbi Chia bar Abba. Harei zekana tachteyan ubeinehen v'chutza lahen kimali ora v'salo. So I will say. So again, the brayso supports Rabbi Chia that when you buy 3 trees, what do you get? The area underneath the trees, the area in between the trees, and an external ring of land large enough for a person with his basket to walk around and collect the fruit. I'm going to buy the Rabbi Yosef. So I will say that is an interesting shayla. So Rabbi says Rabbi Yosef, Osan ora v'salo mizoran. Okay, so we'll say. So now here's what we've established. That halacha l'maisa. When I buy 3 trees, I get these 3 pockets of land underneath the trees, in between the trees, and an external ring. What the Gemara asks over here is that external ring, right? So that little, if you can imagine, it's like a little pathway by the external branches of the tree. First wide enough. Well, it sounds like a relatively small area, but wide enough for a guy to walk around with his basket and pick off fruit. Fine. Now the shaila is, who gets to seed that area? Who gets to seed that area? If you look at the Rashbam, in the Y lines of the Rashbam, 2, 4, 6, 7 lines down. Osan ora v'salo mizoron. Bala ilon de shalohin. O bala sade de halon nishtadla bala ilonos ela b'shas lekitasa verosav v'dros alein. Then came bala sade zoron ubeis halekita yidros halokech hafila v'zron aval tachteinu b'nei b'shiblan de bala ilon zoron. Supposed to listen to this. Here's what the Gemara is asking. Really what the Gemara is asking is like this. It seems to be that the setup is as follows. When I buy 3 trees, the area underneath the trees belongs to me. The area in between the trees belongs to me. That little ring, that external ring around the external branches for the guy to walk around, the harvester to walk around his basket, it seems to everyone agrees that doesn't belong to me. I don't own that. Rather, what do I have on it? What do you call when you have a right of use? An easement, right? Almost like an easement, right? You have like an easement on that. I have the right to use it, but it's not mine. And in fact, interestingly enough, it sounds according to Rashbam, the only time I have the right to use it is when? When there's fruits to be harvested. Let's say, so during the winter, let's say for example, I don't have the right to that land. So the shaila is, who gets to seed it? So is it Ruvain? Because after all, technically speaking, it's Ruvain's property, because he's the titular owner. Or maybe it's me, since I have the right of usage. And if it's Ruvain, then understand what that means though. If it's Ruvain, what that does mean is he's going to seed it, but I then have the right to walk on it to pick my fruit. So in other words, that has to be understood. He has the right to seed it. So that's really what it's saying is interesting shaila. On one hand, I have the usage of it, so maybe I should get to seed it. On the other hand, Ruvain has the ownership over it, so maybe he should get to seed it. So the Gemara says, very interesting shaila. These are related to Nisua. We learn this. Where do we learn this? Hachitzon zoreas haderech. So again, we're going to see this case. We're going to see this case a little bit later. And what's this case? Let's say again, if you can imagine, there are 2 fields. an external field and an internal field. But the internal field, and it doesn't have to be, let's say, one inside of the other, it could be one in front of the other. You can only access we'll call the internal field by way of the external field. So therefore there's a right of way. There's a right of way. So the Gemara says, the Gemara says, who gets to seed that right of way? Right, so let's assume Reuven's on the interior field, Shimon's on the exterior field. There's a right of way through Shimon's field to get to Reuven's. Who gets to seed that field? So the Mishnah said, Shimon, the guy living on the outside, gets the right to seed that field, right? Because technically speaking, it's on Shimon's property. Reuven just has a right of way, not ownership. So the Pashtos applying that to our case, then what should be the halacha? I, so to speak, have the right of way to use that strip of land by the external perimeter of my trees. But the Maisa, Reuven owns it, so Reuven should get the right to seed it. I'm really neat. No. You can't quite compare that. Hasam, Leslie Psida Lelokeach. That's because in that case, even if Shimon, who lives on the external field, if Shimon seeds it, there's no loss to Reuven. Right? Why is there no loss to Reuven? Because Reuven will just walk over it. Now, it's true, Reuven may end up trampling seeds, but okay, that's Shimon's problem, not his. Aval hocha isle psida lelokeach. We'll say in this case over here, if we allow Reuven to go ahead and seed the external perimeters of the tree, that could cause a loss to me. Why could it cause a loss to me? Because I'm going to say like this, Reuven, if you start seeding that area, we'll say, when you seed a field, what happens? You have to till the soil, and what that means, when it rains, it becomes muddy. If my fruit fall off the tree and fall into that area, then what? It ruins my fruit. So if Reuven is allowed to go ahead and seed that area, that can result in a loss for me. So halo dami el l'seif. You're right. It's only comparable to the seif of that Mishnah. V'zeh ein rasha l'zora. So we'll say this second case, interestingly enough, is a similar idea of where, let's say again, Reuven owns an interior field, Shimon goes ahead and owns an exterior field. But in this case, Beis Din got involved. What Beis Din did was it demarcated a side strip of land. And that's how Reuven goes ahead and accesses his field. So this is a case of where, again, Shimon, the exterior field, owns the title to the right of way. Reuven has the right of usage. And in this case, the halacha is, zeh v'zeh ein rashan l'zora. No one is permitted to seed the area. Interesting, right? Neither party is permitted to seed the area. If you take a look at the Rashbam says, "Halo damya hada ora v'salo dami ala seifa de diktani nasnu la bezdin derech min atzad midas shneihen." So in this case over here, same idea of an interior field and an exterior field, but in this case, Bezdin gave a side strip to access the interior field. V'zeh v'zeh ein rasha l'zora. Neither party has a right to go ahead and seed it. Hoil v'nisratzu shneihen ubachru lan derech zayde Bezdin ve'afagav dehefsid muatu shazram ya'akvu alichasim k'taz choshkin gabi or v'salo talik yudashnein. So it says it's very interesting. So essentially, the Gemara is saying is like this: since this strip of land was set aside by both of them, therefore, essentially, what it becomes essentially is like no man's land. In other words, that although, again, to be clear, from a teacher perspective, so Shimon will own it. From a usage perspective, Reuven has the ability to traverse it, but neither has the ability to go ahead and plant it. So the Gemara says, so too, that'll be like this case. The Gemara wants to compare the case of Salo, Ora Vesalo, the case of the exterior perimeter around the external branches of the tree, like this. That ultimately, again, Reuven is clearly the owner, just to be clear. I have the usage, but perhaps the easiest way to navigate this situation is no one has the right to seed that area. Tanya Kavase da Abaye, Abraisa says to Parsa Abaye, Hare Zekana Tachteyen, Ubeineyen, so the Rav say the halacha is now again here it is. When I acquire 3 trees, so what's the halacha? What do I acquire? I acquire the area underneath the trees. I acquire the area between the trees, and I also acquire a thin strip of land by the external perimeter of the trees, wide enough for someone to walk with a basket to harvest the fruit. Kimol ora v'salo v'zeh ein rashain l'zora. What's the halacha is neither party has the right to seed that area. And that is the halacha l'maisa. So we'll say, so now, this is a very important unit of halacha l'maisa. So here's what we have. When I buy 3 trees, so right, we know the halacha when I buy 2 trees. Right? When I buy 2 trees, I can just get trees. I just get trees. What else do I get? I get trees and shoots. Shoots that come from the trunk of the tree. When I buy 3 trees, I get land. What kind of land? 3 areas of land. The area underneath the trees, the area in between the trees, and a small perimeter, a small path, a pathway perimeter, or a small path around the external perimeter of the trees, wide enough for someone to take a basket and harvest fruits from there. Who has the right to seed that area? No one. No one. We leave it unseeded. Okay, we'll say now one more shayla. We'll just do 2 minutes this today and then we'll stop. Okay, so we'll say, so now, this is actually almost like a little bit backwards, but now we'll say, so now, what is the area that has to exist between the trees? So remember, 3 trees becomes a field. We're obviously operating on, we understand intuitively, there has to be some level of proximity between those 3 trees. So what is the proximity necessary? Right? How really what we're asking is how close and ultimately, maximally, how far can they be from one another and still be considered a chevra, right? Can still be considered a tree cohort to go ahead and essentially have a field. Because remember, the whole idea over here is when you buy 3 trees, the way the halacha really looks at this is as you're buying a field. That's really what's happening. So how close and maximally how far, how distant can the trees be? And still be considered a field. So Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Yehuda and Shmuel, me'arba amos v'yad shmona. So Rabbi Yosef says, ultimately, again, a minimum of 4 amos. Now I will say, now here's what's interesting. Remember again, there has to be a minimum distance as well, right? Because here's the issue. If trees are planted too close to each other, or if they're, then it has a status of, a forest. Interesting. And what purpose does a forest serve? What purpose does a forest do? Felling trees. Forest used for trees to be cut down. That's what you do with forests. You cut down trees. So in other words, the whole chap is when they're planted densely, it's clear they're only to be cut down. So if they're too close, it's not a field, it's a forest. If they're too far, then what? They're just simply unrelated to each other. Right? So therefore, again, comes on Rabbi Yosef, and Rabbi Yosef says the trees have to be a minimum of 4 amos away from each other, but a maximum of 8 amos. Maximum. Let's say, by the way, there's a lot you can learn from the trees. Right? So the Apostle says, Ki Adam eitz hasada. The Rebbe said that sometimes the best way to interact with trees is how? A little bit of distance, but not too much distance. This is the key, right? Sometimes if the trees are on top of each other, right? By the way, this is a season of 3-day Yom Tovim, so this is a good lesson to keep in mind, right? Let's say, so if the trees are on top of each other, then ultimately, again, it's not sustainable. It's really not sustainable. If the trees are too far from each other, then they lose their group identity. So life is all about figuring out, right, how much space is the right amount of space so that every tree has the ability to get its oxygen, to get its nutrients, but yet again still close enough so that group cohesion could go ahead and take place. Interesting yourself. So Rav Yosef says minimum of 4 amos, maximum of 8 amos. Rava, Rav Nachman, Amar Shmuel, Mishmona va'ad 6 right? So Rav said Rav Nachman, ultimately minimum of 8 amos, maximum of 16 amos. Right, so we'll stop over here for today. Now we just again dangled that machlokas in front of you. So now we know the machlokas, and Eretz Hashem, the resolution of that machlokas, and Eretz Hashem tomorrow. And then once we have that, we will have fully rounded out. We'll have fully rounded out the rest of the sugya as well. All right, we'll say shkoyach.